Yeah, I think for any entrepreneur that's navigated the last 5 years, I don't know if there was a worse time to be building a company.
Online car retailer Clutch has had its fair share of existential crises over the last couple of years. First, there was the COVID-19 pandemic, which fundamentally changed how people try and buy cars. Now, that actually worked out in Clutch's favor and helped them secure a $100 million funding round in 2021 with ambitious plans to expand all across Canada. Right before low interest rates and cheap capital dried up, effectively killing the growth at all costs mindset in tech, and leading Clutch to have to lay off between 20 to 30% of its staff in 2022 and over 65% of the company in 2023 when another $100 million Series C round dried up. Despite all of that, Clutch kept its head down, they stayed grinding, and this year announced a return to form. Series D round, strong revenue, new valuation that was higher than the old valuation, just in time for the trade war. This week on the Beta Kit podcast, we talked to Clutch's Dan Park and Steven Seibel about every hurdle that they have had to overcome and what that has taught them and how they will prepare for whatever tariffs might do to the automotive industry. How did Clutch steer into the skid? And what lies before them on the road? Let's dig in. Okay, Steven, Dan, thank you so much for joining. There is a lot to talk about in 2025 about what's going on, well, in Canada, in the US, in the automotive industry. But I want to take us back. I want to go to the Wayback Machine a bit and take us back to about 2021 because Clutch has had an interesting journey in those intervening years. And I want to start right at the beginning so that you can explain to our audience that journey. And then we'll dig into the messy 2025-ness of it all, if you'll allow me. So maybe I'll start with you, Steven. Can you take us back to 2021 and maybe the state of Clutch at that time, how you were feeling about the company, what you were tracking for, and then we'll talk about what happened next.
Yeah, it was a interesting time, and I mean, even going back a little bit further to COVID times, for the business, we started originally with Clutch with a test drive model. Our whole shtick was bringing cars to people's homes with a no obligation, no cost test drive, and the idea behind that was to try to build trust in a cheaper way. We were looking at Carvana in the U.S. and some other international competitors, and very much felt that the long term future was a more pure e-commerce play where folks are buying cars online, but the test drive was almost like a form of marketing to build that initial trust with consumers, so that they would think about buying from a company, a used vehicle from a business they never heard of. So we did that for the first little bit of the business. And I guess just before 2021 and 2020, when COVID hit, initially rough time for our business, like many others, when kind of the economy just shut down. But then there was a period of time when folks started shopping again, and used car buying experience, typically not a good one. But when the used car salesperson, you might be catching COVID from them, it becomes that much worse. And we kind of use that as an opportunity to get rid of the test drive entirely across all transactions, go to fully online purchase model. And that really gave us actually a lot of tailwind. We were afraid to do it at first. We thought it was going to hurt conversion, hurt a bunch of stuff. It ended up being a really great thing for the business. And 2020 through to 2021 was just this huge growth acceleration for us, and significantly faster adoption and higher satisfaction with the Clutch product.
I love that you check raised my Wayback Machine and you're like, we need to go back farther, which is really awesome because it helps just set the context of the company story. And maybe, Dan, this is a great place to get you in because you joined in 2019, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, so I met Steve back in summer of 2019. Got really excited about his vision of providing a used car experience that was consistent, transparent, and seamless. It seemed crazy to me that back then the only ways to buy a car were to either meet some stranger in a Tim Hortons parking lot,
Mhm.
or go to a dealership and spend 6 hours haggling with someone in a terrible suit. And so those were two ways, and it felt like for a category where uh, there is a lack of transparency and trust, to create a brand not only online but brick and mortar as well allowed customers to transact in a way that was super easy, almost like ordering a pizza. That was super exciting to me. It seemed like a massive white space, super fragmented, and having been in the VC space prior to that, huge TAM with a massive opportunity around the consumer. So got super excited about that. I don't think I quite knew the journey that I was about to embark on, and I don't think Steve knew it either. But I think the last the last few years have certainly been a test of resilience, and we've thankfully come out on the other side. But we've just kind of grown up together, trying to build this business around used cars.
Yeah, Steven kind of spoke this. I'm wondering, as you described the Tim Hortons situation, I'm like, yep, I totally understand that. Is this the type of circumstance where your company is in a space where no customer actually enjoys the traditional experience, but everybody wants the outcome, and that is an opportunity for a company like Clutch, but then also one of those forcing functions where COVID came in, and instead of having to convince people that this was an alternative, it became the de facto to accelerate that growth.
Well, before I joined Clutch, I did kind of my own independent research, and I think there's a bunch of studies out there that said that 80% of 80% of people, when asked if they would buy a car without a test drive, the answer was no, right?
Mm,
And I think that's just ingrained in human purchasing behavior or consumer purchasing behavior over the last several decades. And I think a lot of folks just assume that the customer knows what they want, in the sense that until you put the product in front of them, then they have something to react to. And so if you ask surveys and collect data around, various things, for example, back in, the late 2000s or the early 2000s, when Netflix was just, embarking, would you send DVDs back and forth in the mail rather than going to a store and renting movies? I think the answer would have been, I don't think so. Uh, and so until you put the product in front of consumers, they don't really know. And I think that's
mm,
where we came up with this concept of providing cars without the test drive, but then also providing a bunch of assurances and building trust around the brand that really helped accelerate the business. And I think COVID certainly helped, because people were forced into that. And over the last several years, I think that trend has continued to accelerate. But even now, it's only something like 5 or 6% of all sales for used cars happen online.
And
wow.
to jump in that on the test drive part too, we have interesting perspective having done it both ways, and there are a few studies, and more so coming out of the U.S. market, but like Dan said, it's an ingrained thing that you're buying a car. Of course, you need to test drive it, and folks kind of go into the shopping experience saying, "I must test drive a vehicle." And then the stats on it is, even if folks that do test drive a car, the majority only test drive one. So people kind of think of it as like, "Oh, I'm going to test drive 3 or 4, pick the best one, get a feel for quality," but it's really just a confirmatory thing. Most
Yeah.
traditional test drives done at a car dealership, it's about 10 to 15 minutes long on a predefined route with the used car salesperson sitting in the car with you. Potentially, if he knows there's a squeak in the car, you'll turn up the radio and show up the sound system and that sort of thing. You're typically not really allowed to bring it to mechanic or check out the car in any way. And it becomes this more performative, I I think I need to do this as part of buying a car,
Yeah.
but what am I actually accomplishing? And that's we didn't want to take the test drive away just to like take it away and be like, hey, we're e-commerce and this is the way we do things. What we offer, we call it a test own period. So it's a 10-day period of time after you purchase a car that you can figure out if it fits your life. You can take it to your independent mechanic, put it up on a hoist, get their opinion on it. You can drive it on rough roads, smooth roads, whatever the case might be, and really figure out, is this a good quality car and is it the car for you? And then after that period, decide, do you want to take it back or do you want to keep it? And we just view it as a modern, better version of a test drive, and not that customers are losing something. It's more so you were alluding to Douglas that for most folks the car purchase model isn't that great, and Clutch is an attempt to make it better, make it more consumer focused, using 21st century tools of the internet and e-commerce to help enable that.
I want to talk then about maybe where this transitions, because BetaKit has covered, and we've talked to on this podcast, a lot of companies that were riding very, very high in a post-COVID environment where, there were some companies during COVID that had their business model completely undercut or changed. There was those companies that maybe had a new opportunity amplified. It was an accelerant. And in Canadian tech, we saw an influx of capital, predominantly from the US, that was driving this great leap forward in maybe digital transformation of some of the industries that had pre-COVID had a harder time. There were also companies in that environment that were like, oh, well, maybe actually our assumptions on these behavior changes aren't going to maintain, or actually we took that money at the peak of the valuation cycle and capital is not as cheap as it was, and we just didn't get there, or some other circumstance. I'm wondering, when it comes to 2022 to say 2024, what circumstances in that environment Clutch was dealing with that led to some of the layoffs, some of the difficulty fundraising? What were the macros impacting you?
In I think 2021 was somewhat unprecedented. I mean, there was so much capital, and VCs and investors were looking for growth. And we have a business that if you add inventory, add selection for consumers, you can just grow because it's so big. And the name of the game was growth. And when capital was that cheap, you generally take it. And so it
Mhm.
was a pretty exciting time. As an entrepreneur, you get a term sheet for $100 million round. It's generally a pretty cool thing. I remember being in my home office when that call came in, and probably one of the highlights of my 5 years in terms of just like you know feeling that elation around raising that round. Um, but with that round came a requirement or an obligation to grow, and that was really, if you weren't growing as fast as your competitor, you weren't going to raise the capital. If you weren't going to raise the capital, you weren't going to grow. And so it was this, I call it the VC hamster wheel, where you have to keep up. Um, and that game worked for a lot of companies. I spent a little bit of time at Uber, and there was a period of time where Uber was burning $9 million a week to launch China, and it took them almost a decade or over a decade to get profitable. And so that model worked, and again today it's a almost $100 billion company, and so that model can work until it doesn't. Meaning when capital runs out, and you don't have access to cheap capital again, then your business fundamentals effectively fall apart. And that's what I think a lot of companies in Canada and frankly globally experienced, where there was a massive pullback in growth equity. It was incredibly difficult to raise capital, and we went from a growth at all costs or aggressive growth mentality to a one of profitability within literally 6 months. It was the largest interest rate increase in 40 years, which resulted in VCs just massively pulling back. And the summer of 2022, most VCs had literally taken the summer off.
Yeah.
And so that that focus that really forced us to focus as a company. I think every company, Netflix, Uber, Instacart, Tesla, every company, Apple, they've all gone through their crucible moments. And for us, I think that was such an important part of our journey, and it almost feels like at this point a long time ago, because we've made a lot of progress since then.
What I'm hearing from you on that hamster wheel wasn't a circumstance like, let's say, some earlier stage companies had around that time, where maybe this was their first major fundraise. They hadn't necessarily proved something out. It was based upon the assumption that they could achieve growth. You're not saying that you weren't able to hit growth. You're saying that the hamster wheel stopped, and either the capital wasn't there, or the growth number that now had to come alongside that capital had changed since your last time, right? You're like, you guys felt pretty good about where you were in your growth cycle. Just the capital expectations that the last round was built on just wasn't there anymore.
Yeah, I mean, we quadrupled growth. I mean, we were top line 4x over almost 18 months. And so, the growth was absolutely there. Uh, it was more about whether or not that next funding round was going to be there, meaning, sure, you
Mm.
could raise the next round of capital, but I think there was a lot of concern back then amongst growth equity investors where, great, let me fund this round, but you're still burning, X million dollars a month. And that's going to run out in 12 months. And so who's going to be there holding the bag? Because it's certainly not going to be us. And so that's where I think BC just pulled back entirely. And effectively at that point, it was a wait and see approach. Let's see how things play out so that when we do fund the next round, we do have a certain amount of confidence that they'll be able to, or whoever the company is, will be able to fundraiser on the next round.
Yeah.
And so that's why
Okay.
profitability was so important. Because if you had profitability that, or were at least close to profitability, then you become more of a self-sustaining business. And so there was this crazy pivot from growth to profitability, which, most companies, it takes a couple of years. We were forced to do that in, less than 12 months.
Yeah. Okay, so Steven, let's dig into like some of the considerations there, right? Because it's one thing to say, hey, we've been setting ourselves towards a target that everyone had agreed upon, and we were effectively driving towards, and now all of a sudden we're being told that the target is in the exact opposite direction. So, like, whether you want to talk about the U-turn or hitting this thing in reverse, that's very, very difficult for, I would say, pure play software companies, right? You guys have a logistical consideration here. Like, you deal in the real world. These are physical objects. I'm wondering from your perspective if there was any additional difficulties there, considerations there just around what you're servicing here that like B2B SaaS companies fundamentally weren't necessarily dealing with, even if they had the same hamster wheel stopping scenario.
Yeah, I would say it was definitely a little bit trickier for us. We have a very capital intensive business in many ways, and the way Dan and I always grew it is we were able to achieve really high top line growth rate, and still actually since then continue to be able to achieve really high top line growth rate, but we were maximizing for growth and essentially trying to keep our unit economics around break even. So we weren't, losing tons of money on each car we sold, or be too negative unit economically, but kind of break even and let's just go for top line growth. But unlike a SaaS company, like you mentioned, we have a lot of physical infrastructure. We Clutch when we buy cars from the public, we pay them on the spot, so we have to pay up front for the vehicle. And we have a whole bunch of cash involved in that transaction. Then when we get the car, we recondition it, and we do all the reconditioning ourselves. So we have real estate all over the country, storage lots. We call them production facilities, but you can basically imagine like a manufacturing esque thing with filled with mechanical hoists, alignment racks, where we're actually doing the mechanical work. And these places employ lots of folks. And then we have our own internal last mile logistics delivery network with single car haulers and folks that drive those to actually both deliver the car and pick the car up. So for us to pivot from growth into more profitability, that's a big lever for the business to pull, because if we want to grow very quickly, it means investing well in advance into physical infrastructure and physical ops and hiring before you actually need the capacity.
Yeah.
Is you kind of think through that marketplace funnel. We need to buy the cars, then we need to recondition the cars, and we need lots of people to do both those things. And there's a time lag to do that, to actually get the cars on the website, to then have both sides of the marketplace operating in equilibrium. And because we set really aggressive top line growth targets, we were building out a lot of infrastructure in advance of the business actually needing it. Unit economics, again, we're still break even, but we were building expense base at a faster clip so that we had physical infrastructure to grow into, and kind of pulling that lever to go from purely growth based to profitable growth was a large one for the business that obviously resulted in us having to scale back the business a little bit to get rid of that infrastructure that was supposed to be meant for growth later that year or the next year, to focus instead on getting unit economics from break even to a place where they're actually quite positive, so that we can, on a net income basis, be break even as a business, control our own future, still raise capital for those future growth investments. We've still been able to, double the size of the business year over year since, and maintain really aggressive top line growth, even with the physical infrastructure challenges. But more to do than a SaaS company where it might have been like, hey, we need to cut marketing and we need to lay off some devs. But other than that, we're going to sit tight and just battle it out on people canceling our subscriptions. We had a lot more levers to pull around just the physicality of the business, to get it turned around to be net income break even. But then also we wanted to maintain high growth rates through that period, and not have a period of decline for the business, but continue to expand on a volume basis.
Can I just ask you what the depreciation cadence is for you? Because I was assuming, like, obviously, like, oh, if you've got if you don't sell the 2023 models, and then therefore like the 2024 ones just come out at an annual cadence, that's going to be rough. Is that related to how cars depreciate over time, or just like the hard cost of you guys not turning that thing over?
There's both. There's a hard cost in terms of just storage. Cars take up a lot of space, and land, kind of frustratingly, even though we have so much of it in Canada, still is quite expensive. So we have our hard fixed costs for that. Where a car price goes in a short term, no one really knows. It is more the uncertainty. Generally, they do come down. But you have Tesla's a famous manufacturer for this. They'll make giant price changes on a very sudden basis, that will send prices skyrocketing, or prices falling off a cliff. So it's a little bit of a hot potato-esque problem where, by holding longer, sometimes you do get lucky, or sometimes you do well. For example, if you have a convertible and you're trying to sell it in December or January, you might
Mm,
actually be smart to hold that until the spring and get some more money for it. But generally speaking, you want to sell the car because there's a cost of capital associated to it. There's a cost of storage associated to it. And who knows what's going to happen with the market. But generally speaking, the price is going to come down because it's a depreciating asset. So you're best to move it quickly.
And this is where we've spent probably the most time and energy investing in technology. As much as we are a company with a bunch of hard costs and logistics infrastructure, we have a very large software investment that we've made around pricing the vehicle. And this is where the opportunity, I think, exists in the Canadian market, where, because we have so much data around the vehicles, both across the country, we're able to price vehicles automatically through effectively machine learning algorithms that allow us to price every car. And right now we're sending out an offer every 5 seconds to a Canadian, and buying just shy of $2 million worth of cars every single day. And the feedback loop you get from actually buying the car, because anyone can put a price on a car. The harder part is actually to put your money where your mouth is and actually buy the car. When you buy that car, we know pretty quickly whether or not we can make money or not on that vehicle. And if we're not converting, for example, if we're sending you an offer, and you're not converting on that offer, we're probably bidding too low. And so we have a very, very high pulse on exactly what's happening in the market on a daily basis, to be able to provide really accurate market-based offers to consumers.
This week's episode of the Beta Kit podcast is presented by Float, Canada's complete business finance platform. Float combines modern financial services and software to help businesses spend smarter, save more, and grow faster. We wanted to know, how do businesses use Float to transform their financial operations? Adrian Pape is a VP Finance at Clue. Clue is a platform that helps companies collect, analyze, and share competitive intelligence. Adrian, thanks so much for being with us today.
Thanks for having me.
I was hoping you could tell us a little bit about what challenges your finance team was facing before you started working with Float.
Yeah, so we started using Float about 4 years ago, I think. And some of the challenges we were facing, we had an old Google form that was very scrappy, I suppose, for our young startup. It wasn't what I'd call a super impressive experience for the CEO. when he would go on a trip and come back.
Nobody wants to look at that Google tracking sheet.
No, absolutely.
Start to be a mess. I would imagine at your business, you do have to track a lot of expenses and things like that. How were you reconciling those records before Float?
Yeah, so it was a bit of a nightmare. We had 6 credit cards, two for each of the CEO, CTO, and CMO, one Canadian, one USD. And so you can imagine when hundreds of expenses hit those cards, you're kind of at a loss of who actually initiated the charge. And so you're chasing whole departments to find out who was responsible, and just sucks up a lot of time.
And Float help with that?
Totally. Yeah. So we knew that these platforms existed out there, and as a tech company ourselves, we wanted to kind of get on board.
Businesses like Clue, you have to do your sort of month-end close every month, right? There's a lot to sort of do, on an ongoing basis. How long was that taking you, and what were the biggest bottlenecks?
As we were going through month end, as you can imagine, it's just chasing these people down. Did they remember to hold on to their receipts? Did they throw them in a shoebox and they're going to hit you with them all at once at the end of the quarter? So you kind of have to guess where to mark the expense until you get that shoebox, and then it's hours and hours of sifting through all that.
Were you there when you guys switched over to Float?
Yeah, for sure. I was one of the original accounting team members. So as we started to build out the team, 2 or 3 of us on the team had gone through the evaluation for Float. Entirely came down to the treatment of Canadian taxes. And so in Canada, you've got HST, GST, PST, QST, all the fun taxes across all the provinces. And none of the competitors like Ramp or Brex were actually coding that properly in the accounting system. And so it was kind of a non-starter for us. If you couldn't get the tax right, we would have to go into the accounting platform and kind of rejig the entries every time. And so sort of what was the point of having this sort of seamless integration?
I'm curious if you guys had a real aha moment when it came to using Float. Was there a moment when you realized it was going to be a bit of a game changer for your team?
When we realized how quick it was going to be to generate a card. And so you whip up that card, you've got it instantly. You can set these controls around each card and the frequency of the refresh and the limits on the card. And we realized it was probably going to be a moment for us to set like almost a 1-to-1 ratio of card to vendor. And so moving away from a card for a whole department, we could then manage the spend individually by vendor. And yeah, it was just seamless. It was really quite slick in how quickly it all came together. And it just meant it was going to be a lot of time savings for us.
What has been the feedback from your team? Do they really appreciate it? I know you've been using Float for quite a while, but what do you hear from the people who are actually on the ground using these tools?
Using Float and having these virtual cards kind of elevates the profile of the company a bit. So we're a tech company too. We want to be using the latest tech, and each employee having that company card in their wallet kind of, just feels a bit special.
What has been the most noticeable improvement in Clue's financial operations since you started using Float?
Over the 4 years, just seeing this migration of our spend into Float has been a huge improvement for the finance team. Everything from the virtual spend management, but also the reimbursements, the bill pay. And kind of another bonus is Float is offering us a 4% interest rate on our balance. That's in there for prepaid cards, and so obviously that's not scalable at a regular bank. But with the interest rates dropping, in some cases it's higher than what we can get storing our cash elsewhere. So we don't really have to worry about having too many funds in Float. And so yeah, it's just kind of like the stress is sort of gone. It's all in one place. It's all moving smoothly, and yeah, kind of consolidating all of our operations into one platform.
Across the country, businesses like Clue are choosing Canadian tech to power their growth. Float provides a homegrown solution for corporate cards, automated expense management, next day bill payments, and 4% interest, helping companies take control with ease. Join 4,000 companies that trust Float for better financial management. Switch today at floatfinancial.com.
Steven said something really interesting about other companies can maybe cut back on dev and marketing and just ride this out. you're not in that position. Noting here that I think when we talked to you last earlier this year, you had 81% revenue growth. The number I have in front of me here is like 320 million. You guys are showing profitability. I'd love to get updated numbers if you have them. I want to understand the decision made. I want to understand the decision points that you made to get back on the right path. And was it leaning into the efficiency of your core unit economics and the transaction, or like what did you guys do beyond, we discussed some of the layoffs and some of the hard cost consideration to make. What else did you do to get this spun back around so quickly?
I'd say Ben Horowitz has a quote in his book "Hard Thing About Hard Things," and paraphrasing it is, "Most problems don't have a silver bullet. The answer is a whole lot of lead."
Yeah.
And I think that was the case for Clutch, where we did a wide variety of things to get the business into a profitable growth mode. But I think one of the big things we did was, before we would source. Well, I mean, when Clutch first started, we were a single side marketplace, so we source cars from fleet, from auction, from all the typical places that traditional dealers source cars from. We reconditioned them, we sold them. That was that. And I think around 2020, 2021, we started scaling what we call sell to clutch, and that's the second side of our marketplace. So that's what Dan was just talking about. We're buying now about $2 million worth of cars per day from consumers selling their car. We knew, based on our data at the time, that those cars, they're better across almost every single metric. They tend to be in better condition overall. A lot of the times, a customer bought it new potentially, and they configured the car. So, if you buy cars from Enterprise or Hertz or Avis, a lot of dealers will source their cars from there. Those companies will buy batches of 50,000 vehicles, and they'll get them all the same color, all the same options. And they're still decent cars, but there's just a lot of them in the marketplace. So there's a lot higher competition level, and they tend to not equip them quite as nice. So you get a bit more budget, but Enterprise really wants you to rent their GPS, so they won't put GPS in the car, where it might be actually a standard option from factory. So that the sell to clutch sourcing model, and literally we built up basically an entirely other marketplace within Clutch to source what's close to 100% of our vehicles, gave us a really big supply advantage, and just unique, really great quality cars generally need a bit less reconditioning, and they're easier for us to recondition and sell and that sort of thing. So sell the Clutch, and those vehicles have a whole bunch of great things that come with it. But it was kind of like building really a startup within the startup to get to the point where we're making the offer every 5 seconds. It's all machine learning powered, and operating that at scale, all the logistics that come with it, facilitating what we have now instant payments. So if you sell a car to us, you get paid on the spot, literally within 5 minutes, money in your bank account. Customer service, you name it, all the things that come up with literally building that other half of the marketplace. But building that business within a business and connecting it to our reconditioning ecosystem and the demand side of our marketplace, really, it was like one of the big flywheels for us to make everything within the company work much better. You get marketing efficiencies, you get tons of efficiencies by building a true, what we call ourselves now, a technical term is a fully managed two-sided marketplace.
Mm.
So that was one of the, I would say, bigger lead bullets that we kind of fired towards the problem.
That bullet definitely hit. Okay. Dan, what Steven has described doesn't really sound like a pivot so much as like a huge operational efficiency unlock that also put you maybe a lot closer to your target customer. Like, obviously they're selling the vehicles to you, but I'm assuming that is also a network of individuals. Like, those cars are better because they care about them more. They're more proactive in the selling decision. Probably much more likely, if they had a good experience, to come back on the other side a couple years later. Like, I guess, how big is that bullet for you that Steven just described?
No, it's massive. It's probably one of the core ones, and I think because we get marketplace efficiencies from doing two sides of the marketplace. So meaning, we spend a bunch of money on advertising. We're the official used car retailer of the NBA. When we're putting out marketing materials for people to buy their cars, that helps us also acquire cars. And then certainly when we're, most of our advertising goes towards actually acquiring cars from consumers. And that creates a halo effect where people associate Clutch with a brand where you can buy and sell cars. And so we can basically get efficiencies from addressing both sides of the marketplace. And so that was a very big component of it. But again, that was really, really supported by a big investment in technology, in data science, to make sure that when we do put an offer out into the wild, it's an accurate market based offer that I think is very hard for folks to just gather from their other independent sources.
And
Okay.
most folks would probably be surprised to hear that the sell to clutch business is over 2 times the size and volume of the business where folks are buying from Clutch, which is probably at first surprising. But when you think about it from like a Venn diagram standpoint, of you have people in the market looking to sell a car, people in the market looking to buy a car. If you're looking to buy a car and you're in the market for Clutch, we have lots of cars, but we only have about 1,000, 1,500 vehicles in stock right now. So if we don't have the car that you're looking for, doesn't matter how much you like Clutch, you're not going to buy
Yeah.
from us. You're going to buy somewhere else. But from the sell to Clutch side of the marketplace, we buy literally everything. So if you're in the market to sell, we can put an offer on your vehicle. And if you like that offer, we can pick it up as soon as same day. So the addressable market for us grew massively, and it's a great supply source for that other side of the marketplace, so that we can build inventory and be more likely to have the match for somebody looking to buy from us. But it's a far more efficient side of the marketplace to market as well, because you're more likely to kind of find that match where, hey, as long as you're in the market to sell your car, potentially you're a Clutch customer. Whereas even if you're in the market to buy, we need to have a car that you're looking for. And our goal is to grow our inventory selection very significantly over the coming years, so that there are more matches to be made. But the sell to Clutch, the important thing is being able to put an accurate price on a vehicle, and obviously have the capital behind it and infrastructure to execute against it. But if you have that, then it's a very scalable side of the marketplace.
Yeah.
I think the thing that we got lucky with, or maybe we're fortunate in the sense that we've always had really strong product market fit. It's a product that, a lot of people think about cars as a consumer discretionary. Used cars are more of a consumer staple. If you need to get to work, if you need to drive your kids to school, if you need to do groceries, having a car for a lot of people is a non-negotiable. And so then, we've got a product where, we think it's better, faster, and more convenient than the traditional models out there, and cheaper. And I think, in the pandemic and kind of going back, there were a lot of SaaS companies and services that were nice to haves,
Yeah.
as opposed to, crucial to everyone's life. There was a lot of these, software for employee engagement and, getting together on a call when you're remote, those kind of software plays that I think have faded out. But if you're, I think for any entrepreneur that's looking to build something, if you're delivering a core product that is something that you need every day, then you're a lot better off, and you can survive the volatility a little bit more easily.
Finding product market fit for like one of the most important consumer purchases that like an individual can make seems like way more than a vitamin in continuing like the startup analogies. Let's take that to 2025, because if we want to talk about ever changing macro, 2025 is the year. I have some notes here. I have tried to do my research to understand what the hell is going on in the world, let alone the automotive industry. But I would love for you guys to just lay out, maybe at a high level, the state of this industry, and maybe where the points of impact are that you're having to deal with. Because I'm wondering if that engaged audience of used car suppliers you have right now is staying the same given rising cost of everything, economic uncertainty, automobile prices and tariffs. Like, talk us through the macro shift right now that you guys are unfortunately once again having to navigate over this, the period of time.
Yeah, I think for any entrepreneur that's navigated the last 5 years, I don't know if there was a worse time to be building a company. You had a global pandemic. You tack on an unprecedented rise in interest rates and evaporation of growth equity capital, and then you add, what's happening in 2025 with tariffs. Steve and I at some point just kind of need to look at each other and laugh and be like, you know what, par for the course. Like, you go through, yes, this might be challenging to go through, but I don't think it's going to be any more challenging than the last 4 years. So I think
Mm,
that's where that experience and some of that confidence around having gone through tough things together has helped. Um, I think that the short answer is no one knows. To be completely candid, I think the tariffs that are in place right now could go away in tomorrow. Who knows? I think it's a constant moving target. What we do know is that this is going to be inherently bad for consumers, and likely the manufacturers will pass on these costs to consumers. The global supply chain has been built over the last 60 years. It's not getting unwound in 12 months, let alone 2 years. And so I think what's going to happen is that a lot of these costs will just ultimately get passed on to consumers, starting with new cars. And so immediately people are feeling the impact of new cars. A good example is the Ford F-150, North America's most popular vehicle, manufactured in Dearborn, Michigan. When they're being imported into Canada because of the retaliatory tariffs, is going to be anywhere between 26 to 28%, depending on how much of there's two separate agreements, and not to go into too specifics, but there's the 232 fentanyl tariffs, and then there's also
yeah.
CUSMA USMC. It's depending on how or what number of parts or what amount of parts are sourced externally from other parts of the world. Those will get taxed differently. And so bottom line is that a Ford F-150 for a Canadian will likely cost 25 to 28% more. And so that's on the new side. On the used side, we fully haven't felt that quite yet. And I think some of that will continue to trickle down onto the used side. And so as production slows, and you've seen some of the plants in Ontario are already starting to shut down, as production slows and inventory shrinks in Canada for new cars, the price of those new cars will likely go up. And then the price of used cars will correspondingly go up. And I think the offsetting piece is, what impact does this all have to the Canadian economy? Because if there's overall decline in cars generally, then you'll see, a counter impact on pricing, where prices could also be impacted negatively. And so I think all of this to say there's a lot of moving pieces. I think even the implementation of these tariffs, in the sense of like actually calculating how much needs to be tariffed given the various agreements that are currently in place, is going to be extremely complicated. And I think there's going to be a lot of political pressure from the OEMs to get some relief, which currently I think the administration in the U.S. is considering. And so as an entrepreneur and someone trying to build a business in this environment, it's hard to do anything preemptively. I think we're all on our toes right now, knowing that we may need to react really quickly, and making sure that we're not making any decisions that are going to put us into a hole long term. And so I think a lot of industries are in the same boat, where some of the decisions they're making around longer term growth have been put on hold as some of the uncertainty plays out, because the worst thing for any business environment is uncertainty, and I think that's what's being created right now.
What does that look like, Stephen? Because we just talked so much about the Clutch's business being better the faster you are at transacting, and we talked a little bit in like the 2022 era of you guys having to like maybe sell off some of the next year anticipated plans. I'm wondering if you're not seeing it now, whether you're more concerned about people not selling their used car because the newer cars are more expensive, or people not being able to afford the used cars anymore because that price has gone up because the newer cars are either so expensive or are not being made right now. Is that is that a fair decision point or something that you're tracking?
Yeah, it seems that the effects of the tariff so far, at least in Canadian auto, used Canadian auto, seem to be almost balancing each other out, where you have some folks that are thinking, this is either the best time to buy or sell a car because, they believe prices are going to move in one of two directions, or folks think it's the worst time to buy or sell the car for the same reason. Kind of like Dan said, the problem is nobody really knows. I mean, we've even tried to look at proactively adjusting our bids on vehicles that we're buying based on potential tariff impact.
Mm.
And the way these treaties work is it's not as simple as it being made in the U.S. It's exempt. It goes down to where do the parts come from, where do the steel and aluminum come from, what is the labor rate being paid in that factory to determine whether or not that car is exempt or not. And the way auto manufacturing works is, and when Ford's running a line, that line doesn't stop no matter what. So if one of your parts suppliers dries up, you need to start sourcing parts for your next batch of cars flowing through. And the first batch of parts might have made the F-150 tariff exempt because it has enough parts content, to exempt it from those tariffs. But then your next run of 500 VINs through that factory might not be exempt from tariffs. So it's not even as easy to say all F-150 prices are going to go up. There's a chance that only certain specific VINs of F-150s actually get hit by tariffs and go up in price, but other ones stay the same. So
Would
when
that
you when
even
you
be like, would there be an impact there at like a per vehicle level where like half the vehicle was made with tariff impacted parts and half aren't? Like, and maybe talk through like how you're tracking those the VINs for the audience here of like, it's not even like this run. It could be like this run, but on Friday we used this one volume knob that was sourced from China, and then like the price is incremental. Or and are you able to track that level of data, or are you just trying to watch and evaluate the downstream impacts on pricing?
So none of the manufacturers report any of that data. I wouldn't be surprised if not all the manufacturers even have that data internally, at least readily available in all cases, to provide to like customs brokerage and that sort of thing. So we don't have any access to it as far as we know. Even new car dealers don't have access to it, which is just driving this general what's going to happen, wait and see. Folks have different theories. I think that they're holding personally about where this is going to lead based on policy coming down the line. But we're focused right now, to the extent we're making changes. It's just keeping inventory turns up and constantly rebalancing that inventory. We're closely keeping an eye on it. There's a big export market in Canada too, where a lot of cars get exported to the U.S., which has a whole bunch of pricing impacts within Canada. For example, pickup trucks are actually one of the most frequently exported vehicles to the U.S. There's a big Canadian-U.S. dollar arbitrage, and that will drive historically, when that's working normally, it leads to elevated pickup truck prices in Canada and the used market because Americans buy them at Canadian auctions, sell them down in the States, and it drives pickup prices up. So if that export market stops, you're going to have a surplus of pickup trucks in Canada. Pickup truck prices will come down within the used market. But then the question is, again, depending what is tariffed and what isn't tariffed, will that also result in higher prices for new pickup trucks? And now you have a elevated price on the new market, and does the used market get picked up by that? And do prices just basically net out, or does something else happen? But it's even hard to go through the mental exercise of trying to figure that one out, because you circle back to no one even knows with certainty what cars would or would not be affected. So when we try to model it internally, scenario model it, you can't really, because it's just assumption on top of assumption on top of assumption,
Yeah.
and the whole thing might change tomorrow. So
Okay.
we just stay focused on speed and turn. And I think if as general consumer advice, I would kind of operate with a similar mindset. If you need a vehicle and your car is broken down, it's not necessarily a bad time to buy, but you just kind of have to go into it with your eyes wide open, understanding the general market and economic uncertainty.
So what I'm hearing from this is that like if you guys continue to have that epic speed to transact continuing, and the unit economics of those transactions remain in your favor regardless of how the variables change at either side, you're still feeling really comfortable about the state of the business compared to previous times.
Yeah, I mean, I think this a lot of people, even during the pandemic, would say things like, "Oh, this must be a really great time for your business." And look, it's not a bad one, but it's not a great one either, because what happens is that if prices go up, then you have to pay more to buy the inventory. It's going to cost more to consumers, so that's going to be more challenging to convert. And so that's not necessarily a good thing. I think, again, the best thing for any business is just stability. And we and other businesses just like when things are more consistent. And so prices going up is not a good thing for us. It's not a good thing for consumers, because all that happens is that the cost of our acquisition goes up, and the margin for us just moves north. And so, if I'm a consumer and if I was gonna give advice to consumers around what to do right now, the best thing you can do is just really stay educated on and up to
Mm.
date on what market prices are. And you could very much see a scenario where you walk into a dealership and people are like, someone's like, okay, this car is subject to tariff, and as a result, you're gonna have to pay $4,000 more for this car. That may or may not be a true statement, right? And so understand the market value of the vehicle is crucial. A lot of consumers and Canadians have no idea how much their car is worth right now, which is why we've provided actually a free tool. So if you go on our website, put in your license plate number or your VIN, we will help you track the value of your vehicle over time. Because for most folks, it's either your most or your second most
Yeah.
valuable asset. And not to have any sense of what that's worth feels financially irresponsible. And on the buy side, if you're able to track market movements and understand, where prices are going, where prices have been, then you're just a more savvy consumer. So when you're walking in, ideally you're coming to Clutch, but if you decide not to come to Clutch and go to a dealership instead, then at least you know what the price of that car should be, and not be kind of hoodwinked around, some false narrative around tariffs.
The last thing I want to ask you about is like whether or not the consumer relationship with automotive vehicles or specific brands is something you're anticipating. And I'll give you two examples here just to see if you guys are tracking cultural relationships with vehicles changing. One, the movement around Elon Musk and just the anti-Tesla purchase environment, if that's something that you think will be sustained or alter your market, or even, going back to Dan, what you had said about the price awareness. I just looked up F-150 price Canada, and the starting amount that showed up was like over $50,000. So we're now talking about like, yeah, this is definitely, I don't know what life you're living if that isn't the second most expensive purchase that you have as an asset in a family, but it's definitely top three. Will you see a continued change in behavior around certain models, whether it's the very, very expensive pickup truck or the Elon Musk associated vehicle, or even maybe like, you know, we're talking about this being such a component of the majority of North Americans' lives, a turning away from this just because the price component or the uncertainty makes it no longer viable.
On the Tesla side, I mean, we are seeing. I mean, I personally think this is going to be a short term impact. I mean, I think generally people have short term memories around this kind of stuff,
Mm,
and I think Elon's um, not he's not dumb, and at some point, if the business starts suffering, he's going to take a step back and refocus on that business. Q1 deliveries were not as bad as expected, but we are on the flip side seeing almost a 50% increase in the proportion of people trying to sell their cars on Clutch, for Tesla specifically in the last 3 months. And so massive wave of folks trying to sell their cars or sell the Tesla specifically. But again, I think, within the next 12 to 18 months, I think things will just, the news cycle will calm down and things will normalize. Kind of going on to your question about consumers generally, I think a lot of people generally like cars, like we certainly do. But when things get tougher economically, instead of driving a Lexus, you trade down to a Toyota, right?
mm,
And so there's a lot of things consumers can do in these tougher times. I think what's still fundamental is cars, unfortunately, for better or worse, getting around, most of Canada without a vehicle is tough. Particularly if you've got, families, or you live in the suburbs, or you have a job that's a commute away. The public transportation infrastructure makes it very difficult for someone living in the suburbs to get around without a vehicle. And
yeah.
so I think for, at least the foreseeable future, this will be a reality.
Yeah. Okay. But if I start seeing you guys listing a lot of like public transit vehicles for purchase, then we're gonna have a follow-up conversation.
Yeah. If you need a city bus, or if city buses are going on for sale, that probably will be a problem.
Until that time, I want to close this off. I got this red 1994 Plymouth Sundance burning a hole in my driveway. What's what kind of offer can you make me? What are we talking here?
I think. Go ahead, Steve.
No, I was just gonna say you have to go to clutch.ca and
Okay.
and find out. That's the best part of the product. I was literally this weekend Easter brunch with my fiance's family asking what's my car worth. I'm like clutch.ca.
Go to the
That's that.
website.
Yeah.
Okay,
You
that's the
got.
best possible answer.
Yeah,
I
you
really
don't want
appreciate.
you don't want a human telling you the answer to that. You want the machine is better equipped to tell you the answer to that.
Yeah.
Okay, fair point. I got to get this thing off the Tim Hortons parking lot then. Thanks, guys. This has been great, and I really appreciate you taking our audience through not only your company's journey, but how it ties to so many very, very important things that are happening at a global level right now.
Absolutely. Thanks, Douglas.
I appreciate the time.